What's up people, my name's Anton and welcome to September. Today I'm going to be taking you through how to create this dynamic box setup inside of C4D and Octane. We're going to be taking a look at some new camera setups, lighting techniques and some rigid and collider body tags in C4D for the first time, so you can get a really realistic, clean looking result just like this. So without any further ado, we're going to hop right in. I'm going to close this off. This is the render I just finished up, and we're going to open a new project. So if I just hide these really quick, you can see we're using exactly the same setup as last time, and we've got a nice blank project to get started with. So for the sake of explanation, for this setup we're going to be using the Megascans cardboard box pack, which I found. These are really high quality. Big props to Megascans, always do a great job, and they work very well in C4D. One little tip is when you're exporting, so obviously this is Bridge, if you guys don't know, Megascans Bridge, loads of high quality assets that you can use, mainly optimized for Unreal, but you can use them with regular software like C4D, Maya, whatnot. Something important to bear in mind, especially when using Redshift or Octane, is you need to make sure you head into, if you've got a new project, head into the render settings here and select Octane Renderer. This is going to make sure you're importing your materials and geometry the right way. And once you've done that, you can hit export. So this, like I said, this is the pack I'm using purely because it's got multiple and it works a little better. And it just groups more into a null. And when we're ready, Octane takes a little bit to load, but we should have 5 boxes usefully packaged inside of each other that we can use. You can keep track of what C4D is doing in the bottom left corner here. You see that it's initializing defaults apparently, which is remarkable, really is. Cool. All right, sweet. So first step, obviously goes without saying, we can probably take this out of the null, I'd say. Also, as you can see, it's got these Octane object tags here, which are super useful. We'll be using those later on to get some motion blur, but for now we can just acknowledge their existence. And we can start going about moving these just out of each other a little bit, so we know what we're doing. We can hop into the other view here real quick and just make sure we know what we're working with. Sweet. So from here, I'm going to really quickly explain what the setup actually looks like. So if we just head to my previous project and we wait for this to load up, you're going to see what the setup looks like outside of the camera, and I can explain. So what we got here at the start of the simulation is the boxes positioned, and they are falling, as you can see, into a sphere which is actually toggled invisible. And there's a rotation effector which is moving them around with a fall off, and what the fall off means is this sort of like nexus looking sphere that you see is that right in the center, it gives them a chance to fall before forcing them to rotate around the sphere. If I toggle the sphere visible, it will block the view, but you can see there is a sphere, and that's what the collider body is, with all the boxes set, soft body, and they rotate around nicely like this. There is very much a case for finding the sweet spot with a setup like this. The rotation can either be way too strong or not strong enough, particularly when it comes to the side here, because you're obviously working against gravity. There's a little bit of tweaking with friction, stuff like that, but ultimately you're looking for a smooth result with a little bit of motion, which then like blurs, and you get a really clean, nice looking, realistic result at the end. Obviously it works hand in hand with aces, and a little bit of material tweaking does the job really nicely. So we're going to go back into our new project and get started on creating that setup. So previously, in this one, I didn't actually take the boxes out of the null. I just duplicated it 3 times, cloned it, let them fall, and I think this way might actually allow a little more customization. So what we're going to do is put these in. We need to duplicate them a little bit more. So we're going to chuck them in a cloner and see how this works. This is going to firstly put them in a grid. You can sort of see. I believe there actually might be more. Nah, never mind. Okay, cool. So we've got 3 by 3, 1 by 1. We're going to turn these down a little bit just so they're a little closer together, just like that. And we can probably go about creating a few more. So if we make this 2, again, narrow this down, this is randomizing at the same time. As you can see, you're sort of getting more boxes here. So it may be best to... Let me think. Okay. My thoughts are that I'm not entirely sure if I like how many big boxes there are, so there needs to be a way that we can go about selecting. Maybe best, hold on, to do what I did before. This may sound confusing, but before, what I did was actually taking the null and putting that straight into the cloner, which meant that it would clone the 5 exact boxes 3 times instead of randomizing them inside of the cloner. Slight caveat to the way I was going to do this before, but I think it might be more effective. I'm really quickly going to re-import these. So I've got fresh default untextured boxes that you lot can download and use and be on the same page as me. Right, sweet. Wait a second for it to generate the materials one last time, and we can dash these into the cloner just like that. What we should get, if C40 doesn't crash, we don't need this many. We need to, oh, amazing. Okay, sweet. Pop back in here, do what we did before. Move these apart, one by one, just like this. Whoa. I also like the touch. There was one little white box because I added a nice little bit of an unintentional variation when working with the boxes. Sweet. So we got all 5 there. We can chuck this into the cloner like that. We don't need the ones to the side. In fact, we can probably just deal with having 3 like this. And if we want to add just like a little more, so otherwise what's going to happen is when we add the sphere, they're just going to fall completely uniform. Honestly, if you cut the render time or start running from a mid frame once they've fallen and the simulation started, it won't actually matter too much. But for the case of setup, what I usually do is I head into where the transform tab is, or rather per step here, the size. You can change the rotation somewhere, I believe. Maybe if I make it linear, yeah, just here. So if we change the count to 3, move this down a little bit like that, we can not that way, but something like this. Oh. Something like that. Just so the box will rotate to different points and it will fall nicely. We can toggle this invisible for now and start thinking about our collider object. So the idea of the minimalist approach to a render like that is that you have a collider object which is invisible and the boxes sort of float around it. And what it does, it encapsulates it in a sphere so the boxes don't fly away. You'll realize when we start applying the rotation effector that it is actually harder to control than you'd think, especially when you set it to acceleration. The boxes will literally gather momentum and fly out of the scene, and the sphere helps sort of encapsulate that. But there are a few little steps you need to do, which I found out recently that actually are important and glitch it out unintentionally. So you've got your sphere here. By default, obviously, hollow on the inside, but C4D for some reason doesn't actually treat it that way. Even if you were to make this hemisphere, and rotate it so that you can very clearly see, and very clearly see that it's obviously nothing on the inside. Even if we put to toggle these visible and scale this up, so you should be able to get an idea of what we're doing now. This hemisphere is going to catch the spheres, right? We can scale this down just so it's a little, and move these boxes over just like this. Even if I was to set at this point, set a soft body, bullet tags, rigid body, and then sphere, bullet tags, collider body. Even at this point, if I was to press play, so it's going to start the simulation, you're going to get your first taste of simulations in R26, it stops right there. Unsure why, but clearly the way the rigid bodies and C4D simulations work at the moment, these hemispheres aren't actually, even if I make it editable and move it down a little bit so it gives the boxes a chance to fall, they fall just like that. So what we need to do, a little workaround. I initially thought that if I managed to grab a, if I grabbed a cloth surface to add some thickness to the sphere, and then maybe thickness of 5, nice little tip. That's how you change mesh from something like a plane, which is incredibly flat, to something which has some actual thickness to it. Still same result, but for the sake of argument, that's a little tip you can learn. You can delete cloth surface for now. What I ended up doing was actually, so just go back to before I made that editable, made this a standard sphere, and I needed to chuck it into our old friend Volume Builder because it sort of refreshed the mesh in an interesting way and made it work, which was quite amusing. So I'm going to delete the collider object for a second. You can have the voxel size as high as you need, because all you need is the bare frames of the sphere, and then we can head into volume mesher and chuck that in straight away and pretty much toggle that. That's all we need. This can be made invisible, and one more time we can head into bullet tags and collider body, and you should get a pretty cool idea of the setup. We'll go back to the start, got our boxes, and they now fall into the sphere like that. What I may do is actually make the sphere ever so slightly smaller because it's a bit big. An easy way you can see the mesh that lies on the inside and sort of size it the way you need is like this. So if I use this just like that, hold on, we're not toggling it uniform. If I go 0.9, copy that, move it down, that should, okay, cool. Something just like that. We can move the spheres down if it lets me. Yeah, something like that. And you can see our simulations working if we toggle off our volume builder. Bop, just like that. We can start to see our simulation working. Obviously, very fast. We need to slow this down a little bit. It's almost as if the gravity is working way too fast. If we check into rotational mass, a lot of this stuff, you can probably make this 50%. This is a lot of dynamics body tweaking, but essentially rotational mass is changing the boxes from, imagine if they had something in them, they'd weigh a lot more, to being empty. Presumably that would actually make the gravity a little stronger, but nonetheless some stuff we need to do. If we head into project simulation, we make the gravity 0. Obviously here you'll see, never mind, thought I was going to make it 0 gravity. At least you know I'm learning along with you. And I believe it's in forces, soft body, where is it? There's another gravity selector somewhere. Bounce, friction, noise, cache, force, rotational mass, attack. Transition time mode. Gravity just here. Right, so we're using bullet tag, so presumably that's why it's in the bullet sector. Cool. Now we've got rid of our gravity, but we need gravity obviously, so we can turn that up. We can make this 50s, can make them fall a little bit smaller. We can make it 100, and they're going to fall double as fast. Something like that. I reckon we'll be happy with something around 500. Should work good for this. Maybe a little less. Make it 300. Sweet. I'm going to save this real quick as boxes tutorial, and we can start setting up our camera a little bit. So this we can hop into Octane now. So I'll look for the standard and then Octane. Back to our regular setup. We need to create an Octane camera. So if we head into that, I'm going to teach you really quickly how to create an isometric view. For those that don't know, isometric is essentially a camera setup. I was about to say camera angle, but it's more of a camera setup. It doesn't have focal length, and you adjust the camera by zoom, right? It's a much more geometric, I believe, sort of less distortion. It's almost like it's filming the entire scene from a 45-degree angle is the best way of thinking about it, similar to this. But there's a way of doing it in Octane which is quite specific but has a really unique look. So we need to set our camera to universal, and we need to head into camera type universal, camera mode, orthographic. And what this is going to do, if we set this rendering very quickly, is you'll see once it exports the materials, these boxes should be very small there, and you'll also notice that as we move it about, zoom it in or out, it doesn't actually zoom in or out. This is an issue. We need to set this up so that we have object parallel, just like this, and then what we see here is directly correlated to what we see in the viewport. We can save that real quick, and you'll still see you can move this about and position how you want, but the zoom will not work. The workaround for this is actually toggling the zoom, funnily enough, in the full view. So if we head back here, we can see there's a little bit of tweaking with camera position here, especially if the camera's right in, you'll realize you start getting these black spots. That's because the camera's actually intersecting the geometry, and this was a glitch which I had to work around. What you need to do is move the camera right back, head it back to about here, and then using these little tabs here, you can sort of just like this zoom in and out as you please. So for the sake of this simulation, I'm going to do what I did last time and set the resolution to about 1000 by 1000. Nice little square. And we can just make sure this is in the center like we want it to be. The sphere is centered, so our scene must be centered. And we can head back in here and zoom in just like this. And at least this way, we have a nice way of, if we zoom in here just so we see what we see, we have a nice way of keeping track of our simulation nicely. Cool. So from here we need to, let's do a little bit of scene setup just like last time. We can hop into a HDR environment, obviously, ACES, path tracing, head into here, grab our trusty HDRI creative face, drag that right in there, make sure this is set to ACES, and you'll get our light. We can arrange this how we want, but we can sort of tweak the light later. This is what gives us our natural light, and ACES is what makes it photo real. So this is obviously a really nice angle. From here we can just duplicate this real quick, make sure we hop in here, clear this and set this to visible environment, so we have our beautiful black background, and we have our simulation. Hold on, for the sake of render time, 2048, 16. Amazing. And this is what we have so far. So next we are going to work on getting that rotation that we want, and we're going to hop out the camera real quick so we have a little more ease of access. The way you work with forces in simulations is in this force tab here. You set this to include and head up to simulation, forces, and then rotation. I believe the settings I used last time, which worked for me, were angle speed 160 set to acceleration. And if I was to let this play, you'd see that we get a result which looks a little like this. If I'm just going to pause this for a second. Oh, I forgot. You need to head into forces. You need to drag the rotation in here, include, and then the boxes will start moving. So you start to get a result like this. And that's because it's affecting it from right at the start, right in the middle, when they fall. And they're getting caught on the sphere a little bit. So we do that one more time. This is where you need the fall off to sort of really take control of the force a little bit. So if we head into rotation, fields, add a spherical field, just here, you can't just click that. And I believe I had to set this to invert so that it would, right. We can see what we get here. So at this point, you can see the box is full, but still get stuck there a little bit. At this point we can, bearing in mind my setup's a little different here than it was from my previous one, we can try changing the angle speed a little bit. which does seem to work, but the boxes that get caught, we may need to think about. At this point, we could actually use this. So we need to think about resizing the spherical field so that the boxes relax down here and don't get affected by the rotation force. So if I turn the size down a little bit, we can start to see what results we get. They are starting to move upwards a little bit, but if I turn this down, I doubt this is going to have too much effect, because I think it's more to do with... Hold on, they do seem to still be rotating. If I hop into my spherical field here, change this to invert. This is stopping the rotation altogether, so we're definitely doing something right. Cool. Cool. A few steps we're going to take. We're going to head into the collider body here real quick and just remove any sort of friction that might be causing the boxes to catch on like that. Luckily the simulation works in real time now, so you are able to... Okay. We need to make this a little bit bigger. It's too small to the point that it's not actually showing what we want. So we make this a little bit like this. Hold on. So we're starting to get that rotation, but you can see what I mean about that velocity. If we make this maybe 75, you start to see the value of tweaking. A lot of this stuff is tweaking, but it's worth it when you get the final result that you're really after. At this point, it might serve us to make the sphere invisible again, just so we can start taking a look at our simulation here. And you see they're catching on a little bit, and I think that may well be due to the fact there's friction here. So we don't want to, I don't think we should remove it completely, because obviously coil boxes do have somewhat friction, but we can make it about 10% and see that they're not rubbing against the sphere as much anymore, especially when they back into each other. You get really organic movement, which works hand in hand with ACES in the realistic line to create pretty interesting animation. It's a useful step away from keyframing, but it's still a little fast. The issue is that when you start toning down this rotation a little bit, they either don't rotate at all or don't move as much. It's a very fine line. You sort of just get this jiggle movement. But we can move it to about 180 maybe. Start to see they bumble around, but I say 200 was pretty much the sweet spot. At this point, you can... Honestly, this isn't a bad result. A lot of this is really perfectionism. Even if you hop back into the camera, you can start to see that this doesn't look bad at all. If we just toggle our Octane render again, you start to get a really cool real-time idea of what these boxes are doing, how they're behaving. They're working quite nicely. I like the way they interact. Something I did just to make the scene a little more full was I managed to, I believe it was here, if I move these together so they're all together and then select all three, hit Alt-G on your keyboard to clone them, there's a really useful way that you can just toggle the axis so that we're working with a centered setup here. There's a way you can rotate this so that you are literally rotating the entire... Oh, never mind, you need to bake the simulation. So wait, hold on. Pause that for 1 second. I'm going to try, see if there's any more tweaking with the simulation that I need to do. At this point, just look for any jittering, anything that could annoyingly affect the setup or be a pain in the arse later on. I particularly like the way these smaller boxes are sort of interacting. It seems to look quite nice. The way they hit each other is cool, and they refract quite nicely with the light. So we'll just lock this to work in the same resolution. And to improve performance a little bit, and when you're look developing, the best option is to head to cache here and just hit bake all. That's going to bake the dynamic simulation so that you're not constantly simulating, and if God wills, we should be able to rotate just like that. So at this point, you can just sort of pick the angle that looks best. With the light or whatnot, I think I went -90 here in the original render. Never mind, I think I went 90 degrees the other way, so it's rotating upwards just like that. I typically found that I don't really want to see the underside of the boxes too much. As great as the geometry is, the light is reflected better where you saw this tape. And eventually managed to retexture it and add a few metallic nodes here and there to get the September logo on the tape, which was actually sick. But in general, you start to see a simulation. This is a pretty good setup for seeing the entire scene. But what I did was I duplicated the camera and then in here, just zoomed this in a tiny bit more, because I quite like having these square scenes with the corners filled up. It always looks better for some reason. You don't want to see this if you're rendering this out or using this for clients or whatnot, or portfolios or motion reel work. Always clip out the start bit, because it's what gives away the simulation, and it looks far better when you start from midway and you sort of see the boxes tinkering with each other in a cool way and getting caught up. It may actually, the one thing I did different in this tutorial, which I didn't do in the original one, was changing its gravity in the first place. If we make this a little stronger to 500 and clear our object cache, I'm wondering how this will change the setup. If we clear all caches real quick and one more time, just bake all. This is quite quick. You can see how the gravity actually has a stronger effect. So that's weighing the boxes down more. You can see it's nowhere near the same, although this sort of stacking looks quite interesting and dynamic. From this point we can, interesting point here to make sure when you're working in aces, slight caveat, but nonetheless, find out what texture you're using. Hop into the node editor really quickly, go in here, find this is Megascans for you, so just clean these up so you can see what you're working with. Find the multipliers going into the albedo texture, because one of them, and it's the one which is linked into the color correction, this albedo needs to be set to aces here, and you're going to see the color space change. This is what really subtly adds realism and actually brings together the bones of your work. So at this point, as you probably remember, for me it's muscle memory, but if we go to Octane Sky here and just take a look at our HDRI, this is set to aces CG as well, so you want to make sure those correlate. And one more time, we are going to clear this simulation and head back into project gravity. We're just gonna move gravity down again, most likely. I believe it was at 300 before, so we make it 200 and then bake the simulation one last time. We should get a result which resembles the original file. At this point, I'd say I'm pretty happy with how this looks. The HDRI is a little too light in places, and God, the velocity of the rotation is very strong. So maybe head into rotation here and just set this to about maybe 150. We're going to run the simulation, so I'm not constantly baking it. But you can see that we're getting a nice velocity which stops at the side, so we're going to tweak it up just a little more until it pushes it right where we want it, which should be, I'm guessing, about 180. It could be 170. Yeah, we got a flying box there. So we just restart that one more time. Find the spot that works for you in your scene and run with it. So for this is a little more fluid than the original one, but works nicely. So, final tweaks for your setup. Things that could work, things that could take it to a next level. You could go about heading into the node editor here and retexturing some of these. So my approach was just to head into Photoshop. You could set a threshold so that it was, hold on, if we just take a look at this, so for the sake of explaining, you can take a look at your texture. I might explain this in a later episode, but the way you can go about retexturing this is setting a threshold so that it's picking out just these blue bits of tape. A threshold will make it into black and white, but then what you can do is you can get some sort of monogram. So for me, I used a September monogram. In fact, I might have the original head into dump just here, you can see the original roughness texture which I used. I had a September monogram which I used with a threshold just to lay over that tape and then set that to metallic so that it had a nice shine on it. You can also use that threshold technique to then create a clipping mask with that and make it red, for example, or any other color without changing the hue of the cobble box itself. And then you can substitute that in the node editor to change the color of your boxes and setup and customize as you like. In this particular instance, we need to work with changing the light a little bit because it's shining a little bit too directly. So if we just head here, we've got the rotation X, and we can find something that looks cool. So if we forgot to cache the simulation, just bake that very quickly. We'll be able to scroll through our timeline as we want. And we can start to see that we're getting some pretty cool looking results here with the boxes. What I like is I really admire the sharpness of this setup, but something which I typically do with ACES setups and dynamic workflows like this to sort of really bring it alive a little more is add a bit of motion blur. And the way you'd go about doing that is if you head into the cloner, this is sort of the parent of all our dynamic objects here. And if we just head into Octane tags, object tags, so we've got object tags here, but this is what I said will come later in the episode. If we just select the parent one here, go to motion blur, object motion blur transform, having the object tag on that will actually enable it. And if we go into the camera, the active camera, hit motion blur here, enable. Interesting point, real shutter speed for motion blur is 0.03, so always set your motion blur to 0.03 and don't tweak anything else in Octane. It's not necessary, and this always gives you a realistic result. So in order to activate it in the viewport, we need to head to the start frames, and the ones after should start catching a little bit of motion blur just like that, and we will start to get pretty fast and cool looking result, especially as these boxes individually get hit. You can see the motion blur really brings it alive, and we start to get pretty recognizable outcome. Cool. So final thoughts at this point: we've created our simulation, we've got something which runs smoothly. If you wanted to render this out in ACES, I was going to mention this last episode with the crystals, but something important to remember is head into Octane Renderer here and make sure your color space here sets ACES CG. That's going to make sure that it looks just the way you want it to look. You can go about tweaking your simulation a little bit more. You can go about adding some more geometry, maybe more random objects, add some more variation into the simulation. It should, in theory, follow the same rules of the simulation and work in the same way. You can add some interest, you can go about adding a background, you can even go about rotating the camera, maybe animating the camera a little more. You can rotate like this, maybe allow it to give it a little more movement. Or if you want to do a bit more look development, you could head into Octane camera, get some processing here, and maybe where the light really catches on these boxes here, you could add a little bit of bloom. Not too much, it's really easy to go over the top with bloom, but you can create some pretty nice looking glows. But if your focus is realism, use those sparingly because they can distract the entire look of the art piece. And just like that, you can see we're achieving a if I just hop into here, pretty similar result.